Hey, what is up, mortals? It is me, Dylan, here with a new video for you. Welcome to part 15 of My Hero Academia meets Solo Leveling. I just wanted to greet you guys by just saying, sit back and relax. You're in for a treat. So, we begin. The raid had unexpected twists and turns, but it was a success. Izuku was already through a big part of it by the time he started, and the rest wasn't much of an issue. Due to circumstances, he appointed the help of a demon girl called Ezel. For some of the remaining floors required a special key to proceed. This didn't become an issue, as Ezel simply pointed to where these keys were located so that Izuku could extract them. This process continued up until they reached the final floor, where the final boss resided. There was the Demon King, Baran. He rode on a massive wyvern with a name that Izuku unfortunately didn't have the luxury of memorizing. For he was sent to battle. It was tough, and he seriously thought that he would die. But he managed to do it. He had what he wanted, the last ingredient for the potion, but he gained a lot more. He had leveled up multiple times during the climb, and this last one was more interesting than the others. He had gained a new job-specific skill, which allowed him to switch places with any shadow soldier, no matter how great the distance between them are. To top all that off, he was able to raise the wyvern, unlike any of the other demons. But since he never bothered to memorize its old name, it was given a new one, Kaizel. Once all of this was over, Izuku left the dungeon, putting his new shadow exchange skill to use for the first time. His vision turned black, but only for 1 second. Once he could see again, he was back in his own world. The Greenette took a quick glance around himself, confirming that he had appeared in his home city. That is also when he went to see how much time had passed since he left, only to realize that he had way more time than expected. Izuku's intention was to utilize the time spent at camp to clear the dungeon. He had even started way earlier to guarantee that he would be able to finish within said provided time frame. It turns out that he had greatly overestimated how much he needed. He didn't notice it, since he struggles to keep any sense of time while inside the dungeons. But he hadn't even used half of the time disposable. It was only the 3rd night of the training camp. Greenette sighed heavily at this supposed inconvenience. But deep down, he was actually crediting this overperformance to his little demon companion. Okay, now what? I have more time than I can handle. So what should I do? Actually, what can I do? It's the dead of night. There's not even a restaurant open for me at this hour. He then ranted, becoming more and more frustrated as the situation sank in. That is horribly incorrect, my liege, a voice then said, making Izuku jump a little. The Greenette immediately realized that it was Igris, who was still in the shadow as he continued. Around the corner and down that street, you'll find a restaurant that's open at all hours. Izuku was a little shocked to hear this, as he asked, Since when did you know the geography of my home city? Quite curiously, Igris narrowed his eyes ever so slightly as he answered with a question of his own. When was the last time you actually had a good night's sleep? Izuku was silent for a while after this, until he conceded by sighing heavily once again. So, since forever ago, he then said, with a heavy and tired voice, before walking as Igris had previously instructed. It didn't take long for Izuku to find the place he was looking for, but he didn't actually order any food. He just sat there, drinking coffee while trying to keep a straight face. There was a lot on his mind, but he couldn't sort it properly. First off, there was the issue of the teachers. He now knew for sure that neither Aizawa nor Nezu could be trusted. Therefore, he shouldn't allow them to have any form of leverage over him. Problem was that as long as he remained at UA, they would have leverage. Brings up another issue. How long can he stay at the school? He knows fully well that his time as a pretend hero is limited, and time is running out. Shigaraki said it best. He already is a villain, and it's only a matter of time before he gives it his full dedication. He needs to leave soon, but a part of him doesn't want to. There's a part of him that still wants to be a hero, and it wants to stay beside its classmates. But he already knows that's impossible. He's taken every necessary step towards his goal. It just happened to lead him away from his classmates and towards villainy. That brings up another issue. What should he do about All Might? He has gathered all the ingredients and made the potion. He can probably heal All Might now. But that is the question. Should he heal All Might? If Izuku is becoming a villain, and even plans to become one, would it really be a good idea to heal the most powerful hero back to his prime? With the path he has chosen, he will inevitably have to cross paths with the hero. So wouldn't it be in his best interest to keep him as weak as possible? But are his best interests really that much more important than the promise he made? And is any of this even worth ruining the friendship he has with All Might? My liege, the voice of Igris then exclaimed, knocking Izuku out of his thoughts. The green net jumped a little, but he quickly calmed himself, as he then asked, "What's wrong, Igris?" With a relatively calm voice. The knight was still hidden within Izuku's shadow, hiding from anyone who would otherwise see him, as he asked, "What is on your mind?" with a somewhat concerned voice. Izuku was a little shocked that Igris noticed anything going on in his head. He wasn't willing to share anything as he just said. "What are you talking about?" Before taking another sip from his coffee, Igris narrowed his eyes, not at all buying Izuku's faked innocence, as he then spoke once again. "Okay, I'll make myself clear. I have known you long enough to be able to tell when something is bothering you, for you aren't that good at hiding it. I also know that you're smart enough to realize this yourself. So I know that the only reason you're sipping on that bean soup you call coffee is to have an excuse to make peculiar expressions. I know that you have something on your mind, but I assure you that I won't pester you about it. I am here to help you in any way possible, if you allow me." With a voice that sounded both concerned and skeptical. Izuku was of course shocked by this. What Igris said was true. He only bought coffee because he always makes weird faces after each sip. He had done this in an attempt to hide what was happening, but it clearly didn't work. The green net sighed after a while, looking quite defeated, as he responded by saying, "I'm thinking about what I should do," with a calm voice. Igris was intrigued by this, as he proceeded by asking, "Regarding what exactly?" Izuku was silent for a short moment, before he responded by saying, "It's about All Might. Based on how I've been operating recently, I'm starting to think that helping him is a bad idea." Igris wasn't expecting this, but he understood. Now that it was brought up, he realized how much of a problem this actually was. The knight himself didn't know what to do, for his chivalrous nature told him to honor their promise, despite the fact that it directly conflicted with their own goals. It was silent for a while, and Izuku took it as a sign of uncertainty from Igris. He didn't have anything else to say, because he didn't know what to say. So the silence remained until Igris decided to speak again. "My liege, I have to apologize, for I won't be that helpful on this matter. I'm sure that my reasoning may differ from yours, but I am just as conflicted, and I unfortunately don't have an answer. What I do know is that no matter what you choose, the consequences could end up being very atrocious on our end. All I can tell you is to proceed, and do what you deem necessary," he said, sounding quite calm. Izuku shook a little upon hearing this, for it reminded him of something. Those were the words that All Might had told him after he came clean about the system, before he had promised to heal him. The green net still didn't know what to do, but he smiled. Igris wasn't there when All Might had said those words, yet he still managed to repeat them. It was obviously a coincidence, but it managed to cheer him up. Igris noticed his smile on his master, and seemed to be glad for his sake. They returned to silence after that, until Igris was reminded of something. "My liege, I won't tell you what to do, but this may be a good time to contact your mother," the knight said, right after clearing his throat. Izuku was once again taken off guard, but he quickly realized that Igris was right. His mother had been told that Izuku was at the training camp, so he needed to ease her and solidify his story. He wasn't sure if the students were even allowed to make any calls, due to how strict the camp had been with its secrecy, but he would have, to hope that his mother wouldn't question it. The green net took his phone out, intent on making this phone call, until he noticed something rather alarming upon powering it up. "Is something wrong, my liege?" Igris asked, noticing Izuku's reaction. The green net was silent for a second, swiping vertically over the screen as he said, "It's my mom. She's been trying to call me repeatedly. I have over 100 missed calls. All from her! With an almost panicked tone. Igris also panicked after hearing this, for the implications weren't good. If Inko was this desperate to contact Izuku, something must have happened, and they were fearing the worst. Izuku was just about to dial his mother's number, was beaten to it when he received yet another call from her. The greenhead didn't stop to think, as he picked up and almost shouted, "Mom, are you there?" into the phone, afraid that he wasn't going to hear his mother's voice on the other end. His fear melted away when he heard a panicked voice ask, "Izuku, is that you?" The boy knew with certainty that this voice belonged to his mother, so he calmed himself a little before saying, "Yeah, it's me. What's wrong?" Only to be cut off by his mother, who began shouting, "Young man, where have you been? I tried calling you 1,000 times, and you didn't pick up!" While sounding both angry and concerned, Izuku was of course shocked by this, but he quickly tried to defuse the situation by saying, "It was more like 100 times," with a joking tone. His mother wasn't having it, however, as she shouted, "Izuku!" with the same tone as before. The boy understood that pretending to be careless wasn't working, and decided to do what he had gotten used to by now, acting and lying. "Mom, calm down. I'm at the camp. Where else would I be?" With a rather calm tone. The silence followed, and Izuku let out a sigh of relief. That was a mistake, as it was soon followed by more shouting. "Young man, don't you dare lie to me! I just got off a call with your principal, and he's informing that you're not attending the camp!" Izuku was frozen upon hearing this. A lot went through his mind, but right now he could feel nothing but anger. "That damned rat! I'll rip his head off!" he instinctively shouted, forgetting that his mother was listening. But Izuku heard enough to tell that he had scared her. He was about to say something to at least try and calm her down, but he was stopped when Igris fully manifested in front of him and said, "My liege, something is wrong! Your classmates are under attack!" With a voice of urgency, Izuku immediately turned to Igris, shocked to hear what he said, as he then heard a shooken up, "Izuku, who was that just now?" coming from the phone. The greenhead was now frozen in place, for a new realization had just hit him. Throughout his plans, he always made sure that no one would be able to expose him, because he could only imagine what would happen if the heroes found out about the truth. The one thing he had never thought of, however, was how his mother would react. What would she say when she found the truth? And what would she think when her son turned to villainy? Izuku didn't want to think about this, for it always led to his mother being heartbroken or resentful in some way. "Izuku, are you still there?" his mother then asked, her voice sounding the same as before. Hearing her voice didn't help Izuku, for it only served to make him more unstable. It took almost everything he had to keep it together, as he quietly muttered, "I'm sorry, Mom," before crushing the phone in his hand. The greenhead was still frozen after that, as if he was trying to comprehend what had happened. It wasn't until Igris shook him back to his senses that he took action. The two of them ran outside at full speed, before Izuku shouted, "Come forth, Kaizo!" With a demanding voice. The dragon appeared on command, letting its master and fellow soldier climb its back before taking off in the sky. It hadn't been given any other command yet. It just moved out of instinct, as if it knew where to go. Izuku didn't question this, for his mind was occupied by something else. Just quickly interrupting today's video to let you all know that our merch store has received an update. Finally, at last, we have released our 7K merch. If you're interested in picking up some high quality merch, the link will be in the top line of the description. I recommend hurrying, though some items are limited and will only be available for a limited time. These items are also signed by James C. Fur. Link in the description below. And thank you all for 7K subscribers! Now, I'll let you get back to the video. Meanwhile, things were not going well at the training camp. The students had all gathered in a clearing with the wild pussycats for a so-called test of courage, until everything went wrong. First they noticed that the forest had caught fire, then Pixie Bob was caught and held hostage. Then more villains began coming out of every direction. It was bad, in so many ways. Not only were the students spread out over the forest, Mandalay and Tiger couldn't help them, since they were busy fighting the villains that were in front of them. Ida was one of the lucky few that hadn't left the clearing just yet. He was in shock, for he never imagined that this could happen, and therefore couldn't fully react when the heroes told him to get back to camp. He remained frozen, just long enough to see one of the villains raise their weapon to kill Pixie Bob. The others rushed, hoping to stop the villain in time. But it was clear that they wouldn't make it. The villain grinned, looking ready to end the defenseless hero, until a powerful gust of wind stopped him. Everyone stopped in their tracks, almost being knocked over by this sudden wave. They then turned to see what it was, only to be horrified. What they saw was a massive reptilian-like creature with powerful wings and menacing fangs. Its scales were almost as black as the night itself, as it descended to the ground. "What on earth is that thing?" Tiger shouted, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Everyone reacted the same way, for they did not know what this thing even was. The dragon stared them all down, before standing on its rear legs and raising its wings before letting out an earth-shattering bellow. Ida was still there when the dragon appeared, and he was as frozen as the rest of them. He, however, was the first to notice that the dragon wasn't on its own. Standing atop of its scaly back was a dark figure, one that Ida could never forget. "Midoriya!" the blue-haired teen shouted, in a mixture of fear and hatred. The greenette, however, didn't seem to notice Ida at all. He just leaped off from the dragon's back, wearing a cool expression as usual. Both the heroes and villains recognized him as a UA student, but they were still shocked. The heroes were told that he wouldn't have been present, yet here he was. The villains were in shock over the sheer spectacle that it was his entrance, but they didn't let it distract them for too long. One of the villains, the one with the massive sword, charged at the boy. He intended to kill him with one strike, but Izuku wasn't even looking at him. The villain was slightly irritated by this, as he took his swing towards the boy, only to watch his blade shatter before even making contact. Shortly after that, he screamed in agony as his arm fell off. No one had been able to follow what just happened, for to them it looked like the villain had lost his arm and sword by some invisible force. Then they saw that Izuku was holding a blood-soaked dagger in one of his hands, and they finally put two and two together. Izuku still didn't look at the villain, as he said, "Quit your crying. You're lucky I didn't go for the head," with a cold voice. Everyone froze up after hearing this, and understandably so. These were the first words that Izuku uttered since arriving. He was actively threatening this villain's life. The greenette then turned his gaze over to the other villain, who jumped upon realizing this. The villain shook in fear, as he desperately held his magnet-like weapon up to Pixie Bob's head while saying, "Don't come any closer, or I swear, I'll kill—" only to be cut off when Izuku threw a dagger straight into the hero's throat. Pixie Bob immediately began to choke on her own blood, until she stopped moving. The villain was frozen in place, unable to comprehend what had just happened, as the dagger tore its way out of the fallen hero's throat. It then returned to Izuku's hand, who looked just as cold and unamused as before, while saying, "What was that just now?" with the same voice as before. The villain couldn't keep it together anymore, and panicked before running off into the woods. Then they noticed that the other villain was missing, even though his arm was still on the ground in front of them. The heroes were in utter shock by all of this. Their first instinct was to attack Izuku, but they didn't. There was something in his aura that stopped them, making them too afraid to even get close to the boy. They just watched him as he stood there silently, until he shouted, "Arise!" with a powerful voice. As if on command, a dark figure that resembled Pixie Bob rose from the earth. This alone put the other heroes in shock, but there was more. Other similar dark figures rose from any existing shadow around them, amounting to a small army. The heroes didn't even know how to react to this, for it was too much. Not only had Izuku killed Pixie Bob without remorse, he raised her from the dead. Not only that, he had done that exact thing to what seemed to be hundreds of individuals. This was all confirmed when they could see the resurrected shadow of Ingenium among these ranks. Izuku was unaffected by their reactions, as he gave only one command. "Keep the students safe," he said, his voice being as cold as it always was. Every shadow present saluted in response, and immediately got to work. Mandalay and Tiger still felt the desire to attack Izuku, but they still couldn't bring themselves to do so. They then realized that the greenette had only ordered the shadows to protect the students, which probably meant that they could cooperate for now. So they decided to go with it, despite knowing that it was nothing more than an excuse to avoid Izuku. Ida also wanted to attack the greenette, and with his anger, he wasn't afraid to die either. The only thing that stopped him was the sight of his undead brother, who seemed like he wanted to tell him that attacking was pointless. He couldn't speak, of course, but Ida still understood and reluctantly agreed. Izuku didn't spare anyone a single glance as they left the clearing. He just kept looking out into the woods until Egress walked up to him. "My liege, what's next?" the knight asked, patiently waiting for his master's orders. Izuku was silent for a while, until he looked at Egress and said, "Now, we need to," but was cut off by something. Neither knew exactly what it was, but they both felt it. Suddenly there was a monstrous aura radiating towards them, and it was powerful. Then, without warning, it suddenly disappeared. They regained their composure shortly after, but they could still feel themselves shaking a little. "Please tell me that I wasn't the only one who felt that," Izuku then uttered, sounding like he was shook up at this. "I felt it too, my liege." Egress then responded, sounding just as affected as his master. They both then turned to the direction it had come from, trying to figure out what it was, or rather, they already knew but wouldn't dare to point it out. "Was that who I think it was?" Egress asked, sounding like he was trying to compose himself. Izuku responded quickly, as he said, "Who else could it be? Who else could it be?" with a voice that was similar to that of Egress, only it had a little hint of anger. No more words were uttered after this. They both knew who they were talking about it. There was only one entity that could possibly emit an aura of such magnitude, and this presence alone escalated the situation. They then narrowed their eyes and clenched their fists, as their trembling suddenly took on a different meaning. "Kaizo!" Before leaping onto the dragon's back once more. Egress followed soon after, before the dragon took off at full speed. It knew exactly where to go, but neither it nor his master knew what they were going to find when they got there. Thank you all for indulging yourselves in all this information thus far. I really hope you enjoyed it. Now, there are a few more things that I'd like to go over before the video ends. Firstly, I'd like to thank our patrons, BD Flames, Ethan Davis, Terry Chills, Shifter Meals, Adam Zagil, Zill, XAV Beat 03, and Joshua Phelps. Secondly, I'd also like to thank all of our YouTube members, Toya Costa, Rob the King, Sith Lord 906, CF2364, and Knuckles, Romeo Tempest, Angel Juarez, Donald C. Stewart, Brian Greer, and Demonized Fox. Thirdly, if you're in the mood for some great storytelling, We the Celestials has you covered. Our We the Celestials, My Hero Academia, and Naruto What If channels retell the story of their namesake anime with a twist. And fourthly, for those who are keeping track, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in today's excellent content production. Their details can be found in the description below. Lastly, if you're interested in what we do here at We the Celestials, I'd like to extend you an invitation to join the team. The only caveat is that we only accept members from 16 years old to join our crew. You can sign up for whichever category fulfills your interests by joining the recruitment Discord using the link in the description below. We're always looking for members to join us. Well, that's it from us for today's video. So thank you all for watching, and have a great day.